The concept of being too big to fail originated in banking, referring to institutions whose collapse would threaten the entire financial system. This principle was tested during major economic crises, where governments intervened to prevent catastrophic chain reactions. For an individual, however, the idea translates to a perceived immunity from consequences due to immense wealth and influence. This perceived immunity can manifest as taking extreme financial risks or engaging in legally questionable activities. History shows this is a dangerous fallacy. Numerous wealthy individuals have faced ruin through bad investments, fraud, or hubris. The mechanisms are often similar. Leverage multiplies gains, but also losses, and isolation can blind one to reality. Unlike corporations, an individual's wealth is not typically protected by systemic bailouts, making the fall personal and absolute. Therefore, the challenge becomes not about avoiding failure, but understanding that no amount of money can erase fundamental risk. This psychological phenomenon is documented in behavioral economics as the wealth shield effect, where extreme resources create perceived invulnerability. Historical patterns show similar trajectories among individuals who reached comparable financial heights, suggesting this is not an isolated case. The fundamental human limit referenced is mortality itself, the biological reality that affects every person, regardless of status. This testing took form through investments in life extension technologies, private medical research, and exclusive health monitoring systems. The catastrophic cost manifested as financial losses from these ventures, strained personal relationships, and eventual legal complications. Psychological research indicates that extreme wealth can distort risk assessment, creating what experts call affluenza, impaired judgment due to financial insulation. The belief in one's own myth refers to the internal narrative that success proves superiority rather than acknowledging circumstance and luck. This pattern mirrors documented cases where financial empires collapsed following similar psychological trajectories of perceived invincibility. This figure's ascent was built on financial innovation and technological disruption, leveraging market gaps with precision. The business model often involved high-risk, high-reward strategies that generated immense wealth, but also attracted regulatory scrutiny. Such rapid expansion created a corporate culture where aggressive tactics were normalized, and dissent was often marginalized. This environment can lead to operational overreach, where the pursuit of growth outpaces sustainable management practices. The trappings of extreme success, private aviation, luxury vessels, and elite networking became both symbols of achievement and potential vulnerabilities. In finance, such trajectories sometimes follow a pattern, where initial innovation gives way to overconfidence and strategic missteps. The mechanisms of downfall in these cases frequently involve a combination of market forces, legal challenges, and internal governance failures. This segment illustrates how foundational business practices can determine long-term stability, regardless of early spectacular gains. The timeline for these events spans recent decades, a period marked by rapid technological change and volatile markets. The core of the story isn't about a single business deal, but about a pattern of behavior fueled by unprecedented resources. Several key, documented points outline the trajectory of this pattern. This pattern often begins with initial success during favorable market conditions. The availability of substantial resources can lead to increasingly risky decision-making over time. Documented cases show similar trajectories, where initial wealth accumulation precedes a decline phase. This pattern differs from single business failures by involving multiple, interconnected ventures. The documented timeline reveals how behavior patterns evolve when operating with exceptional financial means. The accumulation of wealth was staggering, with financial analyses consistently placing his net worth in the multiple billions. This fortune stemmed primarily from his controlling stake in a successful private company, a common pattern among self-made billionaires. Diversified investments in real estate, venture capital, and other assets further compounded this wealth, creating a vast financial ecosystem. Such extreme wealth often creates a significant buffer from ordinary societal pressures and constraints. This financial power funded an increasingly insular lifestyle, where normal rules and social feedback loops no longer applied. The lifestyle became experimental, a pattern seen where immense resources allow for the pursuit of unconventional personal projects or philosophies. This shift from wealth accumulation to radical lifestyle change marks a critical juncture in many documented downfalls. The insulation provided by wealth can disconnect an individual from the practical realities and consequences that govern most lives. This inner circle became a carefully constructed buffer, isolating the individual from external scrutiny and dissenting opinions. The investment in personal security extended beyond bodyguards to include sophisticated surveillance systems and secure communication networks. Advanced health monitoring systems were implemented, tracking physiological data in real time to manage stress and optimize performance. This controlled environment created a feedback loop where the individual received information primarily filtered through trusted advisors. Meanwhile, significant business missteps became increasingly visible to the outside world. These errors often involved over-leveraging assets, misreading market trends, or failing to adapt to regulatory changes. The isolation meant warning signs from external analysts or competitors were often dismissed or never reached decision-makers. This pattern of insulation from reality, combined with poor strategic choices, created a trajectory toward financial decline. As pressure mounted from investors, regulators, or market forces, the subject made a series of defiant, high-risk decisions. These often involved doubling down on failing ventures, a common pattern in business downfalls where leaders refused to cut losses. The decisions also included engaging in complex financial maneuvers, such as leveraging assets or creating opaque holding structures. Another tactic was publicly attacking critics and authorities through media statements or social media platforms. This behavior reflects a psychological shift, where protecting one's image becomes prioritized over sound business judgment. The core strategy shifted from building sustainable value to defending a carefully constructed persona. This pattern mirrors other documented cases where leaders become isolated from reality as external pressures increase. The transition from value creation to reputation protection typically accelerates the eventual collapse. Legal and financial pressures reached a critical mass, creating a perfect storm of accountability. Official investigations were launched into the company's practices, marking a formal transition from suspicion to legal scrutiny. This pattern mirrors other corporate downfalls, where regulatory attention follows financial distress. Former allies and executives began to depart the organization, signaling internal collapse. Some chose to cooperate with authorities, a common mechanism in white-collar investigations where insiders provide evidence. This cooperation often accelerates legal proceedings by providing insider knowledge of corporate operations. The departure of key personnel creates operational vulnerabilities while investigations proceed. Such scenarios typically involve multiple government agencies coordinating their scrutiny of business practices. Asset freezes and seizures are legal mechanisms where courts or regulatory bodies restrict access to funds or property. This typically occurs during investigations into financial misconduct, bankruptcy proceedings, or enforcement of judgments. The impenetrable financial fortress refers to complex corporate structures or offshore holdings designed to protect wealth. Severe structural cracks indicate fundamental flaws in business models, excessive leverage, or unsustainable debt. This pattern mirrors historical financial collapses, where overconfidence and opacity preceded institutional failure. The personal cost becomes undeniable when legal battles drain resources, reputations are ruined, and personal assets are liquidated. This phase often involves intense public scrutiny, loss of professional standing, and severe personal stress. The transition from immense wealth to financial and personal vulnerability is a documented phenomenon in many downfall narratives. The relentless pressure of maintaining a vast empire created immense psychological strain. Legal battles drained resources and consumed attention that could have been directed elsewhere. The collapse was not sudden, but a gradual erosion of foundations once thought unshakable. Systems designed for security and legacy preservation ultimately failed under the weight of accumulated pressures. This pattern mirrors other documented cases where wealth intended as protection becomes a liability. The dramatic downfall encompassed both professional collapse and severe personal consequences. There are significant gaps in public understanding of these complex financial and legal mechanisms. Many misconceptions persist about how such collapses occur and what truly drives them. The exact internal motivations, the private conversations, and the full extent of his personal beliefs remain largely speculative. Public statements and leaked materials provide clues, but not a complete picture. A major misconception is framing this as a deliberate, coherent quest for literal immortality. This pattern is common in high-profile cases. Public narratives often simplify complex personal drives into sensational myths. In reality, such pursuits often involve overlapping goals: legacy, control, or overcoming perceived limitations, rather than a single fantastical claim. Without direct access to private records or candid testimonies, analysts rely on behavioral patterns and documented actions to infer intent. This leaves room for interpretation, but the evidence suggests a more grounded, if ambitious, human story behind the public speculation. This case represents an extreme manifestation of a common trait among some ultra-wealthy individuals: the belief that money can solve any problem. It reflects a conviction that capital can mitigate any risk and suspend ordinary rules that govern society. This mindset is not about magic or science fiction, but stems from a profound miscalculation. The miscalculation lies in overestimating what capital can actually control in the real world. The reported figure of $10 billion spent is best understood as a symbolic estimate. It symbolizes the vast resources deployed in a futile attempt to overcome immutable constraints. This pattern is observed in historical downfalls where financial power is mistaken for omnipotence. The core mechanism is a failure to distinguish between market influence and fundamental human or natural limits. The collapse represented the total evaporation of fortune and asset value, not a literal checking account drained on singular projects. The cost was the entire empire, not just a line item in a budget. This case serves as a stark study in risk perception and its consequences. Such collapses often follow patterns of over-leverage and market misjudgment. The evaporation of value demonstrates how quickly paper wealth can disappear. Unlike gradual declines, these events represent systemic failure across multiple sectors. Risk perception failures often involve underestimating correlation between assets. The complete loss illustrates the difference between liquidity and solvency crises. This phenomenon demonstrates how immense success can distort an individual's understanding of vulnerability. When you routinely overcome massive business obstacles, the line between difficult and impossible can blur. This blurring creates catastrophic blind spots in decision-making processes. From a practical standpoint, it highlights the limits of financial insulation. Financial resources create a buffer, but cannot eliminate fundamental risks or human error. This pattern appears across various industries, where success breeds overconfidence. The insulation effect makes individuals less responsive to warning signs they would normally notice. This creates a vulnerability paradox, where greater resources lead to greater exposure. The legal system operates on established frameworks that apply uniformly, regardless of wealth or status. Market forces represent collective economic behaviors that no single entity can permanently control or override. Human biology imposes fundamental limits. Aging, health, and cognitive constraints affect everyone equally. Once regulatory consequences are initiated, they follow procedural pathways that are difficult to halt. This demonstrates how systemic risk operates. Vulnerabilities within interconnected systems can trigger cascading failures. Historical patterns show that financial overextension often precedes institutional collapse, regardless of initial resources. The inexorable nature of these processes serves as a cautionary lesson about the limits of monetary influence. The collapse extended far beyond the individual, impacting employees, investors, and entire market sectors. It demonstrates how the actions of one person, when amplified by immense resources and unchecked authority, can create widespread fallout. This pattern is not unique. History shows similar collapses where concentrated power leads to systemic risk. The story concludes not with a supernatural curse, but with a tangible, real-world accounting. A vast fortune was ultimately spent on maintaining an illusion of invincibility and control. What remains is a clear blueprint, a case study in the ultimate fragility of unchecked ambition. The mechanisms are often financial, leveraging debt, opaque accounting, and overconfidence in perpetual growth. Comparisons can be drawn to other historical downfalls, where personality cults around leaders masked fundamental weaknesses.